the okay, Nelson, all set.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate your support on this. I think the only rule for this session is that we are going to interact. It's, as I said, it's not a presentation. It's a conversation session, really having a conversation around our ecosystem, as accelerators, as other enablers in the ecosystem, as various partners. We want to sometimes just pause, reflect, and as we do that, we ask questions. Some of the questions we don't find answers, but it's actually sometimes the question is more important than even trying to find an answer. So don't worry if we don't get all the answers we're looking for. I have a tall list of questions I want to be asking us to reflect on. And as we reflect, we would be able to now see what gaps are there. So by way of introduction, my name is Nelson Amu. I'm based in Accra. I'm CEO of Innohub. Innohub is essentially an accelerator which supports small and growing business to become sustainable, scalable, investment ready. And the narrative we would always have around some of these things, really supporting businesses, then they grow, then they find investment, then they grow, and they find investors. So it's innohub.com.gh. I think .ca is one. So Sarah, it's one word, innohub.com.gh. I could share that in the chat. Yeah, so we've been doing this at least for 5 years, basically on the wheel. And the wheel is basically moving from one point to another, find businesses, support them, you want them to grow, they become investment ready, you build business plans, build financial models, you start talking to angel investors, start talking to funds, and so what's really, what are we doing? Is it, and I'm asking questions, and these are questions I've been asking myself, is it working? Is the model of acceleration working? There recently was a session also, another platform where I had one of the speakers really asking questions, accelerators really working? If they are, have they reached their optimum? If they've not reached optimum yet, what could be done to get them to that place where you could see you get an optimum result from that? How do we measure success of these things? And as I share this, I'll be talking about experiences from what we're doing in Accra. And then as we share that again, Innohub business acceleration, impact investing. At a point, our mission, which was basically to support them to grow, and all of a sudden you realize that one model or one component of your model, which is to match them to investors, becomes challenged because you are struggling to find investors who have an appetite to invest at the scale you want to do. And you begin to scratch your head at that time. So what do we do? Because if your business model really is anchored on these SGBs or SMEs or startups, you support finding investment, and every investor you engage tells you the ticket size is too low for their consideration. You're talking about SMEs or startups who are looking to raise $100,000, $1,000, $200,000, and you meet investors who tell you, well, our minimum ticket is at $1.5 million, so $2 million. And this is not a one-off thing, it goes on and on and on. It makes you begin to realize that the model needs to, you need a reflection about the model. And this is something that we've identified across several accelerators and incubators. So in Ghana, also as part of conversations on a West Africa sub-region, you hear lots of these accelerators and incubators sharing same stories. But on the other side, you also have investors whose biggest worry day in and out is the fact that they are struggling to find deals. They spend a whole year screening 20 deals only to invest in 2 of them, because only 2 of them really merited their funding. So you are asking yourself, if you are working on businesses who are struggling to find investors because all the investors are looking at a particular range. And the deals and at the same time, you have investors who are saying there are no deals on the market. In fact, there was a report recently by Andy that actually showed how you don't have a lot of impact investing deals happening in West Africa and co. And it's solely because there's a lot of lack of a viable pipeline. So there's no pipeline. At the same time, investors are crying, startups also crying they can't find deals. That also, I mean, it doesn't end there. It comes a time when accelerators ourselves are also talking about the fact that you are not getting quality pipeline even into your programs. We've had instances where you have a fund approach you, the ticket size is right, but you really ask yourself, the inflow into your program, would there be the right outflow to get you to this investor who could make a deal? So there is a lot of disconnects in the whole thing. So I call it the conveyor belt, where you will typically have a box. So if you go to a manufacturing center or a factory setting, you may have a box, let's say it's water, a bottle of water, a box, or in boxes, moving on a belt from one end of the factory to the other end. And you want to see how it moves smoothly. It gets to a place where one machine will come up, it will put a wrap around it, it gets in the place, another machine will pour the fluid into it, it gets to the next phase, another machine will just put a cap on the bottle, it gets another stage, another machine will just pick the bottle into a box and then begins to wrap up the box, and then you go. So when you have that, that's the conveyor belt. And that is not happening well in our space. We want to really get down to the bottom and say, hey, guys, is it working or not? Now, to be able to do that well, I would pause here now. So that was a brief opening remark. So I'm going to pause here right now. As I mentioned, it's been very interactive. We want to, for a start, know who is on the call. You can just drop your name and country in the chat room. Okay, so yeah, great. So Sarah has already said, okay, so name, organization and country. So Sarah is in Guatemala. Let's see who else is here. Okay, Jen Anston from Intuitive Capital Investing, US. Thank you, Jen. Okay, so that will be coming on. So I believe Jen as a fund likely would resonate some of the points I'm making about how funds are struggling to find what you would call investment ready ventures, or ventures who they can back and can basically be sure that their investment will yield the kind of returns they're looking at, whether it's impact returns or capital returns on that. You'd always have various kind of returns that investors are looking for. Okay, so there's Jemima, and okay, so I believe that has to be coming on. So I'm basically just going to be throwing a few questions and we'll be asking ourselves. So as this is very interactive, I wouldn't mind if, Jen, you don't mind, I could put you on the spot and ask you to share what has been your approach in finding pipeline. How do you find deals and does it work?
So I'm a little not maybe the best person to ask because I've just been doing research with a partner called the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa about pipeline development for agroecological entrepreneurs. And what you're saying, Nelson, really resonates with the research that we've completed over the last year, which shows that most investors, the lowest investors, are at the $200,000 to $300,000 ticket size. And those are social investors, which we think would be interested in what we're trying to promote, which is investment in agroecological agriculture. And yet when we surveyed entrepreneurs, agroecological entrepreneurs across the continent, we came up with 68 responses from 17 countries. The 60% of revenues were below $50,000. So obviously the ticket size of initial investment needs to be somewhere south of 100,000.
Yeah.
So that's like one of the initial pieces of information. It's been confirmed by in interviews I've done with investors, banks, microfinance institutions, and intermediaries. And I'm now working on a accelerator model. And one of the things that we're building in is this lower ticket size, and we're trying to design in so that the investors and grant makers, philanthropics and bilaterals will buy into a mixed blended facility with both grants and investments that are at a much lower level than most commercial capital. And that seems to be a huge barrier. And it's really interesting to hear you confirm it here, that it's also just broadly the case for accelerators that are in the broad sector, not just in agriculture. I know there's other constraints in agriculture. So that's been my experience. And then I can just say, specifically, I have been working with some foundations that want to invest in Africa in agriculture. And of course, the investment teams are looking at wanting to make one investment for like 1.5 million into a fund. But they can't find the kinds of funds that are doing the work that they want, with the outcomes being both for the health and well-being of healthy food systems and healthy ecological outcomes. So I'll stop there and thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. I'm happy to actually see how there are cases to back what I'm saying. And interestingly, when we design funds, there is almost that assumption that once you design, you're going to find a market for the fund. And so you go to market and then realize that for 2 years. And I've actually spoken to a fund in Ghana, which for about 2 years, basically could not do a single deal. And we've seen funds pack out of the country. At the same time, there are ventures who are looking for these funds. So what is the disconnect is when I talk about the conveyor belt, is it moving at the pace it has to? Is every component of the conveyor belt really functioning as it has to? If we take our minds back to the processing factory, you bottling water, where there is an empty bottle on the conveyor belt, it gets to a stage, the bottle is filled, it gets to a stage, the label is on, it gets to a stage, the cap is on, it's put in a box. How can we efficiently, for this investor who is looking for a fund to put their $1.5 million in, or for the investors who are looking to do their 200K deals in agricultural entrepreneurs, how do you make sure that before the 200K is done, there is a vehicle somewhere that is doing a 50K and gets them to a stage where they can make revenues of 100K or 150K, so they cannot take the 200K out of it. So clearly, and this example you gave is not unique. I hear it every day. I hear it every time. And I keep hearing investors say, well, there are no deals that would match our appetites. Same way as investors are talking about that, you have accelerators. So as you design an accelerator, we start asking ourselves, what kind of pipeline will be feeding into your accelerator? So investors would have to step back to the accelerators step back to possibly incubators or other pipeline support organizations. And it goes all the way down, even from universities. What kind of support systems would we want to design to make sure right from the get-go, you are building some talent from that early stage? They graduate from university, there is some kind of support for them, incubation, post-incubation, or pre-acceleration activities, and then it feeds into the next stage of acceleration. And once we begin to model, you see that if I'm setting up a 10 million fund, maybe I want to commit about 5% to pipeline development, to ecosystem players who may be supporting in some of these things. And once you do that, you would not have your portfolio team sitting down for a couple of years without getting the right kind of deals. So that is a clear or a classic example that you share. And I would also want to find out if anybody else has an example before I ask my question. So I see Jewel Thompson is on the call. I'll be happy to put Jewel on the spot because she's been part of this conversation on the value chain approach, EVC in Ghana. And once Jewel has joined, I have not discussed with her, but I'll be happy to just drive right into her brains and ask Jewel if you could share any initial thoughts on this conversation before I pick on other people's possible issue as well.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I know.
Hi, Jewel.
So I joined in mid-question, so feel free to just quickly refresh me and welcome me back to the space.
Okay, so I'll be happy to do that. Essentially, I give an illustration or an analogy of the conveyor belt in a factory setting, where, for example, if it's a bottling factory, it's bottling water. You may have, first of all, the empty bottle at one end of the conveyor belt. It moves to one stage. It could, at that stage, receive water automatically. It gets to the next stage. The bottle may get its branding put on it. It gets to the next stage. It gets a cap put on it. And the final stage could be where another machine lifts the bottle into a box and packs it, and then it's now ready to possibly be delivered to Jewel's home. If we look at the accelerator, incubator, enterprise support ecosystem, and then just oppose it with funds, you typically hear from the very top investment funds, various ticket sizes who have the narrative that they're struggling to find ventures to put their money in. At the same time, you have startups, SMEs, SGBs who are on the market, and their biggest concern is that there are no investors willing to put their capital in what they are doing. And this is very typical in emerging economies. And you see there is a clear disconnect between these two supply and demand side players of capital. And we sit in the middle as accelerators, and we also see that there is not quality pipeline feeding into our work as accelerators. So clearly, how do you see this as an example like as a conveyor belt that possibly is not moving smoothly, and possibly what kind of experiences might you have had in the ecosystem? But in your case, since you've been part of the whole EVC enterprise value chain journey, you could also share some thoughts along that line, and then we could come back to any specific questions for you.
Oh, most certainly. I think that sometimes what we're seeing here within the disconnect is the fact that key actors are communicating oftentimes in silos. And so and I would say that for our space in particular, whereby there are some people doing the work with a certain group of entrepreneurs at a particular level. And then some of the younger ones or emerging ones aren't aware of these support mechanisms. And then they may go through one program and exit and then realize that they're just kind of hanging off the conveyor belt without another level to attain to. And so what happens is that then they end up partaking within the market without adequate support. And then of course you see over maybe 2 years time, a couple of months later, they're still at the same spot. They haven't moved forward. And so I think with what EVCA is attempting to do is to find a way in which all of these service providers, these key actors and players can begin seeing and addressing the gaps from a very high level approach where we're saying, let's look at this ecosystem. Let's see where exactly this one entrepreneur is falling short and what would they need to kind of get to the end of this process successfully, whereby if there's someone who's interested in making this level of investment, they're actually getting an entrepreneur who's gone through somewhat of a support chain or support supply chain that has really helped them in a way that is beneficial to what they're attempting to provide to the market. So when you see this, we looked at it from an approach of saying what's happening at the beginning of the entrepreneurial journey, what needs to happen in the middle, what needs to happen towards the end. And then you see within our ecosystem, we have a lot of key players at the the beginning of the journey. So a lot of us, like the incubators that are working with this pipeline, but we realize in evaluating this chain that there's perhaps an opportunity for something to be happen before these entrepreneurs enter into an incubator. So is there a way that perhaps someone can take ownership, or we can identify or ensure a program exists in a way that maybe helps people come out with the better ideas and, you know, kind of pull through that process? So it's essentially a really big map of the young entrepreneur's journey through the ecosystem, and an assessment of the ecosystem as to where, much to your point, Nelson, like how can we pull them through more successfully, and how can we ensure that, again, all of our permeant actors aren't operating in silos, but are doing so in a way that is beneficial to an entrepreneur at every stage of their journey. So whether they're early, they're mid, or they're at the growth stage. I hope that helps a little bit.
That more than helps. Thank you so much. I'm glad I put you on the spot, Joel. I'm very grateful. Very insightful remarks, but really, I think you took me to the very first question I was going to be asking. Really, what is the end game of the support? Do we understand the end game? Is it just that we have a program we design, and so definitely it would have to be run like this, or this is what the entrepreneur needs at this stage, and this is how we're going to support? But most importantly, how do you build? And I would be asking a question which I would really want all of us to just type in and answer in the chat room. And it's asking a simple question: what are the building blocks in an entrepreneurial ecosystem? What would you think are some of the building blocks that are required to build a robust entrepreneurial ecosystem to support enterprises? And I would be very grateful to see a few answers coming out of us. What are the various building blocks that will be required to build a robust and a sustainable entrepreneurial ecosystem that essentially gets the right results in supporting entrepreneurs? If you have universities, training facilities, you have incubators, you have accelerators, what would you think are the key building blocks that would be required? You could figure out that and share your answers. But another question that really we want to be pausing to reflect on is, what is the end game? Do I just want to do this for the fun of that? And that cuts across even investors or program sponsors and accelerators and incubators. What is the end game of what we do? Like Simon Sinek would say, start with the why. Why are we doing this? Do we really understand, or do we know why we do that, or we just want to design something and get some numbers in our report and show what we've done? Or there is a
Oh, Nelson, we lost you for a second there.
They're on another program.
Oh, there we go. Now I can hear you, but you're frozen.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Oh, we lost Nelson, but I did put the questions into the chat if anyone wants to jump in and start sort of naming off things that can be used to build a robust ecosystem of support for founders. Does anyone have anything they'd like to share? Hey,
Sorry about
Nelson.
that. Yes, I think the bandwidth is quite low. So I'll take off the video for now. Yeah, so I was talking about the phenomenon of entrepreneurs really hopping from one program to the other. And I would invite Joel and possibly, I've seen a few other names, I could call Thomas. Why would we think entrepreneurs really, they join one program, midst of that, they join the next one, or they finish one program and they're looking for the next program. Could there be a gap that is not being met? I'll be happy to get any thoughts on that from anyone who wants to. Jewel, Thomas, Doris, Letitia. Yes, any thoughts would be appreciated. This is towards fixing the conveyor belt.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that when we're looking at the conveyor belt, especially from our incubatees, let's say from those that are really, really early stage, the question then becomes, all right, so what next after incubation, meaning that they've used that time to validate their concept a little bit more, test kind of in a safe capacity, and just help them get to, being structured. What happens after that? Because they're not in the position to quite possibly attract, high tickets, but maybe just a little bit less than that. So how do we ensure that they get access to that next level of financing that can kind of put them in the middle, where they're not necessarily high growth, but they're right in the midpoint and they still need that support. So I think that there's a gap there that happens that a lot, I can see more than likely a lot of our entrepreneurs, they can get that support early on, and then there is that gap before they can actually get the funding or support they need to actually move to the next level. So that's kind of one area I would say, and we've been looking at, and myself as well, just figuring out that I wouldn't say the missing middle, but that component there. Oh, we lost Nelson. But yeah, I'd like to share that thought, and I guess anyone else can chime in.
One of the things I'd love to hear from, which is we actually discussed during a session last night, which I don't want to derail the conversation and go off in a different direction, but we did discuss the fact that a lot of so my thing was trust, right? Building trust in the ecosystem on all sides. But one of the things that was shared in a session last night was the fact that, at least if we're talking about the continent, most entrepreneurs that receive funding are expat led. They're not, local Africans. And most of the VC funding comes from outside of the continent. And so I don't know if that's anyone's sort of lived experience or have anything that they want to add to that. But I thought that was extremely interesting. I know I'm based in Guatemala, and I know in Latin America, the Latin American entrepreneurial ecosystem, that's a big factor, as well as that investors are coming from the outside in, and then they are looking to invest also in either expats or, other, at least for Latin America, other Latin Americans who've been educated abroad and have maybe come back or to start a business locally.
Thank you, Sarah, for holding the fort. I'm struggling with my data connectivity today. I hope we can go through before it goes again. Typically, when it rains, you have such challenges here. Right. So, Jewel, I missed the last point you were making, but I got a good part of that. So, thank you. And Sarah also makes another very, very cogent point, and it's one of the key arguments coming up in the African ecosystem. There are a lot of examples, especially coming from Eastern Africa, where entrepreneurs who are non-indigenous, or if I could just call it as it is, white entrepreneurs, would always have that white privilege in raising funding at the expense of local entrepreneurs. But that is another big conversation for another day. So again, people just run from program to program. Could it be the fact that they go in without a clear understanding of what the program stands to offer them? Or they go in just for the fun, they just like programs and what have you? Thomas, Letitia, would you want to share your input, since I know you run accelerators, you run training programs? What would you think are some of the reasons why some of your entrepreneurs will be hopping from place to place?
Hello. So one thing I think, one of the reasons why I think entrepreneurs hop from program to program is sometimes the vision of the entrepreneur is not clearly defined. So even after they've received support from one program, and if they're lucky enough to even receive proof of concept funding, they may not be heading in the right direction or put it to good use. So then within a short period, they find that they still need that backing or support they get from such programs, and then hop on to the next program, looking at it as an opportunity instead of looking forward to position themselves where they could build some traction and get more support than that particular program that can provide.
Let me play the devil's advocate with you on this particular point. Is it possible that at the point of the program offering support or offering funding to this entrepreneur, there wasn't a good understanding of what kind of milestone we're meeting, and then what's the next phase like? So if I'm doing a 20K POC, I know that within 6 months, I am going to send you to XYZ for another round of investing, knowing that you're going to run out of that, rather than just giving it to you and then you end up not being able to do much, and then you have to now come back in the same loop looking for your next way out. Could that be the situation? Still along
Yes.
the whole value chain angle, or along the conveyor belt analysis?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, so it still comes back to us and the design. How do you make sure that as I select you, I know where I'm moving you to on the conveyor belt? I know if I'm to move the dial, I know where it's going to get to, rather than just take you and then we're done and then you're looking for the next program announcement. And some of them actually still go back to that same accelerator for other programs they would run, hoping to get any other kind of support from them. And really, it's making the work not fun, if I can put it that way. You're not clearly defined. You're not seeing clearly defined results. You're not seeing the next stage for this business or for this entrepreneur you're supporting. And so when we even want to talk about matching them to investors, it's just another ballgame altogether. I don't know if anybody else, and at this stage, it would be great if any entrepreneur who has gone through any program, of course, you don't even have to mention the program source, but basically talk about the expectations on any enterprise support program and how possibly maybe at the stage you went, that wasn't a program you needed, or you needed something more than that program, or you think that there could have been an earlier kind of support for you rather than that kind of support. I have seen accelerator programs where you open up a call and you are seeing a lot of idea stage coming up. And clearly that's a mismatch, because the idea stage and the accelerator stage are two different things altogether. It's not just a matter of narratives, but really is what it is. If anybody from the other side, entrepreneurs, so we've had a fund speaking, that was Jen speaking from the fund angle. We've seen people in the ecosystem doing and also sharing their views. And if there are any entrepreneurs who may want to share their thoughts, or any other enterprise support entities. So Caleb Edwards, you're welcome. If you have anything to share, or anyone else who wants to make a point to this before I move on. But there was a question which is still begging to be answered. What are the key building blocks of an entrepreneurial ecosystem? If we could just point out some of the building blocks, then we ask apologies again.
Oh, no, I wasn't sure if it was your internet or mine, Nelson, because mine's going out now too.
Mine is going off. It's typical of us whenever it rains, especially rains for long. You have such challenges, and it's been raining since the past almost 20 hours in my part of town. So yeah, hopefully the next 20 minutes of the ride will be smooth. Okay, so I want to open up to any other person, but any thoughts on the building blocks? You could just put that in the chat, or any other thoughts on the whole conversation around the value chain. How do you make sure that early stage entrepreneurs know where to go to for support? How do you make sure mid stage know where to go to, and then late growth stage always knows where to go to as well? If I'm an investor looking for deals, I also want to know where I can go to. If I'm looking for a fund to invest in, I want to know where I can go to. How do we build that kind of seamless ecosystems, and particularly in emerging and developing economies? How do we do that? And again, on the funding angle, okay, there is a conversation around in other markets, missing middle. So it is assumed that in the very early stage, there could be some funds. So friends, families, angels could come in. At the later stage, there's another fund, but at the mid stage, you always don't have investors doing that. The interesting thing is that in emerging economies like in Ghana, I see there is a missing early stage and a missing middle. So there's a missing early middle funding. There are difficulties if somebody wants to get a 10K or a 5K USD, 10K USD, 20K USD. And there are a number of factors, social factors that would really account for that. You don't have lots of, let's say, family relations with a lot of disposable incomes who would always come in to share or to support you in building what you want to do. I have lots of examples of startups who come in. What I want is a 10K. A 10K USD can be make a lot of difference for them. And I have personally done some of such supports where it's a very little ticket, but it moves them so far. Unfortunately, in that part of the conveyor belt, that early part is not moving. The middle part is not moving. Everybody is packed. I mean, today I had a call with an investment fund, and I was okay, I'm back. Sorry. So as I was saying today, I was sharing an opportunity with a fund, and the venture is looking to raise 1.2 million. And the investor said, I'm sorry, we now only do from 10 million. And the lowest we can do is about $7.5 million. Such a huge disconnect from the reality on the ecosystem. So all the funds are sitting at the very up there. And then you have those who need capital, nowhere close to that. So there is a missing early before the missing middle. How do we come back to fix that part of the conveyor belt to make sure if investors or if entrepreneurs are not able to move from the early stage, they can get to the middle stage, and they can get to the typical Series A, Series B, and what have you. So back to the conversation, how do we address that? Any thoughts? I think somebody put up something in the chat room before I lost internet, so I've lost that chat as well. And there was a private message to me as well.
Also, too, if people want to just unmute themselves and speak, that's totally fine as well.
Yes, if you want to unmute yourself and speak, perfectly welcome.
Nelson,
Okay, so
I would love to hear too, just from your experience of running so many different programs, what your experience is and what you have seen as well. I think that would be really helpful for the group too.
I would share my experiences soon. I'll share the good, the bad, the ugly. A cut across, and I basically try to sit in that space where you put in conversations together between startups or investors, and sometimes these two are speaking entirely different languages. You also have instances where you yourself as accelerator manager, you are just out there looking for good pipeline into a program. And there was a recent program we launched where we wanted just 5, and out of the over 60 applications we had, really just about 2 or 3 of them fit what exactly we wanted. And that really tells you, even at accelerator level, you are struggling to find pipeline, and it's a big challenge. We had to extend the application of the call by another 2 weeks to see if we could use that time. But then again, if you have other players in the whole value chain who are feeding into your value chain, it becomes a much easier conversation. So as you do the program design, and that's a new thinking that we are having as we do the program design, we want to start thinking who else might have done some programs possibly at the lower end, such that they could feed into what you are doing. And that makes it quite a smooth transfer of these startups from one place to the other. And that level of hand-holding and the handshake really gives the startup an extra value rather than they going back into the loop and to try to see what may work for them or what may not work for them. So Joanna, you seem to want to share something. You could either share, unmute yourself and share. It's fine. I saw your.
Hi, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, I was saying I joined a bit late, so I missed the beginning. So I don't know if what I'm going to say is a bit, of course.
Please go ahead.
Okay, but I'm speaking as someone that's taking one of the programs, so potentially an entrepreneur. I think sometimes the issue also is within this environment, being able to develop the idea is strong enough to get to implementation stage for it to be able to grow beyond that. And then also sometimes there's so many ideas that you need something more definitive to measure it up against to know whether it's a feasible idea or not. So from my experience with a program that I attended, it was very good for an entry-level stage, but I needed more of a boot camp sort of thing to develop the idea a bit further and then know where to take it from there. So I don't know if that helps with the discussion.
That certainly helps. That certainly helps. I think it comes back to the conversation around one size does not fit all. So the program could be good, the quality could be high, but what is the depth of support that one entrepreneur in the program may need as against the other entrepreneur? And it comes back again to see who is offering that kind of support. How do you, in an ecosystem, and we have just about 10 minutes more, and I will try to be stringing in the conversations and see how we could have some absolute conclusion around that. How do you as an ecosystem clearly map out who offers that deep hand-holding for entrepreneurs, who offers that bootcamp style training for entrepreneurs, who is offering that advanced level high touch support for entrepreneurs, who is offering investment readiness, who is offering deal readiness, and who is offering the cash. Until we are able to string in all these relationships, you would actually be in a kind of a maze and you see all the actors in the maze. It's not only the entrepreneur who is in the maze, you have investors who are in the maze because they are on the market. And now because of COVID, you don't see that, but they are traveling to countries to do due diligence, to do scouting, to do prospecting. And that is a lot of money on their budget. They do all that, they come back home and they still analyze all the deals and they realize that all those they met are not really what they were looking for. And that would have to start another cycle of that research work, go to another country, sometimes try to even drop your ticket sizes and what have you. So the investors are in a maze. Accelerators are in a maze. They are not finding the right kind of pipeline that could fit into what they want to do, the programs, the quality, the standards they're looking at. You have incubators in a maze. They don't know who else to pass on their entrepreneurs to. And then entrepreneurs are in a big maze because they don't know who to go to. At what point should I go to this stage? So how do we move from silos, all of us, to say, I am an incubator or I'm a university. I offer training programs. I offer business incubation. I run acceleration. I'm a fund. How do we sit in one room and build an efficiently run conveyor belt such that the bottle would move from the beginning of the belt all the way to the final end of being in a box when the process is complete? Now, there are so many truncations in the journey. Things get terminated wrongly. So entrepreneurs are just hopping from place to place. And you sadly see a lot of them quitting the whole journey at a point because they get tired. So how do we make sure that these things are not happening? So in building that conveyor belt or in fixing that conveyor belt, it's really coming back to how do we destroy this silo approach to building systems and really build a ladder or a line that runs between all of these programs and make sure we don't have to stay in a maze forever. So those are some of the key points I would make. In the last 5 minutes, I want to pause if anybody else would want to share any idea or any thoughts or any reflections. So that'd be good. So Jen, I don't know if you want to come back from the investor angle, if there's anything else that you think you want to touch on based on what has come up so far.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nelson. I guess I would just say that I think since I'm trying to work with people in the social finance sector, I do think that many investors are still interested in a very extractive model of finance. And for those of us in the United States that are trying to advance racial and social justice, one of the big key demands that we have is, inclusive, appropriate finance. And I fear that a lot of the investors that are looking for these higher tickets are also behind more of an extractive finance model. So I do think that looking at bilateral, multilateral, and government loan facilities, and those that are founded by philanthropy, where there's a lower rates of capital and maybe more of this incubation work is really critical. We need more intentional support for this sector and the small business sector, because it does relate to the bigger goals of the, the SDGs around dignified work, around healthy ecosystems, healthy diet. So I guess that's one thing that I just, I've been really asking the questions around. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, so the various types of investors and what they are looking for, it's another conversation as well. And again, when you talk about impact investors, where some of them still want to see you doing 5x in 3 years, and that's another conversation as well. How do you sync all of these models? But I like your concluding points on being intentional in supporting these small and growing businesses or these startups. And the intentionality is what also calls for being systematic as well. How do you build the right systems that really make sure they are supported in the right chain that they have to? Thank you, Jen. Jewel, from your side of EVC, do you have any reflections as we get towards the closing mark?
Yes. For us, it just shows the amount of work left to do, but then also points a light to the fact that we need to be in a better position to amplify the work that's already being done so that everyone has a clear picture of what current programs, systems, and structures actually look like, so that it makes it a little bit easier for us to identify the gaps. Because right now, again, for those that may be exiting our space, they're entering into another gap because they're not quite ready for acceleration just yet, but they need something there to get them ready for acceleration. And then once they've gotten there, we need to have something else available. But that again comes from the work that is attempting to be done by EVCA to map this out and have that essential preparation for the entrepreneurs. And I think it was too, from what I could hear last from Letitia's point, just about understanding the individual entrepreneur's journey as well, and what their vision is for what they want to achieve by the end of it. Because we also have that misconception that some of the entrepreneurs may not know exactly what the end goal is, whether it is a matter of them actually getting investment, or it is a matter of them staying and actually creating a sustainable market for themselves that, at the end of the day, they've built a strong business that might not even need that level of funding to that point, or quite possibly they could benefit from a different type of funding mechanism. And that needs to be a little bit clearer too, in supporting them to know what their end goal is and that they're all not built the same as well. So having a response in place for those once they figure out what it is they want to do, how they want to grow their business, and then of course having a map developed so that we can point them in the right direction and work better together.
You couldn't have said it any better. So Jewel is from Ashesi University, where they run students ventures at incubation and what have you. And so there's a clear case where they exit from that place and they cannot go to an accelerator immediately. Who fills that gap? And I think it's a very important question. As many universities are beginning to launch business programs recently, we had at least 2 of them coming up. How do you make sure once they leave that space, there is a clear point for them to go to? Thank you, Jewel. Again, there's a comment in the chat room that says, I believe one starting point is ensuring a collaborative and consultative approach between ecosystem support providers. The value chain will be more integrated if the goals and expectations of support providers are well aligned, right from incubators or even right from universities through to Series C funding. So how do you make sure there is that line that runs through? And again, investors don't just hop into a country looking for the deals, but they are able to look for enterprise support entities who may be able to help them make due diligence much more efficient and faster, and find the right kind of ventures. And possibly also look at how we could design support packages for these enterprise support agencies. Okay, so there's more comments. In addition, support providers and ecosystem players, partners must aid in clearly distinguishing between incubators and accelerators to help startups and small business know which programs they should aim for. This will also help to manage expectations of startups and small businesses. Thank you very much. This is a very important point you're making, Ken David. I think it summarizes a lot of the conversations. When people clearly know where to go to, it makes it easier for them to go to the right places if they so will, and then get the kind of support that they are looking for. And the other players, which is the capital holders, investors, would also be able to possibly have pipeline partnerships with these sources who may be feeding into them, and they could be doing their screening and selections much easier from there. There could be a lot more points to discuss, but I'm conscious of our time. I know my host, Sarah, may be watching her time. Sarah, do you want to make any remarks?
No, just to thank you,
Before I
Nelson, so
thank-
much for such a wonderful session. I know I have learned a lot from this session as well, and just to thank everyone who participated and joined us today. We do have a networking break for the next hour if you all want to join us in Wonder for that, and otherwise we have 2 more blocks of sessions after that networking break. So hope to see you all in later sessions today.
Right, thank you very much, Sarah. I would like to thank each of you for being a part of this. We'll be happy to engage or connect further. Like Sarah said, let's join on other sessions, get on Wonder, let's meet up and then keep the conversation going because it cannot be the end of it today. Thank you, everyone. Very grateful.